The amber liquid splashed across the polished bar top like scattered promises, each drop catching the dim light of the military watering hole. In that split second of stunned silence, every conversation in the room died. Every eye turned toward the woman whose two simple words had just shattered a Navy SEAL's composure completely. Viper 1. Those weren't just call signs thrown around casually in dive bars near military bases. That wasn't some Hollywood fantasy or stolen valor nonsense. That particular call sign carried weight that most people would never understand. It carried ghosts. It carried secrets that were supposed to stay buried in classified files and unmarked graves halfway across the world. Sarah Martinez had spent 3 years trying to forget that name, trying to build a normal life where nobody knew what she'd done in the shadows of America's longest war. She'd traded her combat boots for running shoes, her tactical gear for business suits, and her rifle for a laptop. She thought she'd successfully disappeared into civilian life. But the past has a way of finding you, especially when you're drinking alone on a Tuesday night, trying to drown memories that refuse to stay submerged. Especially when some cocky special operations soldier decides to test whether the quiet woman at the end of the bar is really who she appears to be. What he didn't expect was for his test to backfire spectacularly. What he didn't know was that Viper 1 wasn't just any call sign. It belonged to a ghost story that even elite operators whispered about in hushed tones. A legend that was supposed to be just that, a legend. But legends don't usually buy you drinks and make small talk about the weather. Legends don't have scars that tell stories they'd rather forget. And legends certainly don't look you in the eye with the kind of steady gaze that comes from staring death in the face and walking away. The SEAL's name was Marcus Rodriguez, and, in about 30 seconds, his entire understanding of the war he thought he knew was about to be turned completely upside down. Because the woman sitting next to him wasn't just another veteran trying to forget. She was the reason some very bad people were dead, some very good people were alive, and some very classified operations had succeeded against impossible odds. This is the story of how a chance encounter at a military bar became the beginning of something neither of them saw coming. How two warriors, each carrying their own burden of service and sacrifice, would discover that some connections transcend rank, branch, and the walls we build to protect ourselves from our own past. It's a story about what happens when the myth becomes real, when the legend sits down next to you and orders a whiskey, neat. And, most importantly, it's about what happens when two people who've seen the worst of humanity find something worth fighting for again, each other. The Anchor's Rest wasn't the kind of place you'd find in travel brochures advertising Virginia Beach's attractions. Tucked between a pawn shop and a tattoo parlor 3 blocks from the naval base, it catered to a specific clientele, military personnel who needed a drink and didn't want to answer questions about their day job. The neon sign flickered intermittently, casting unsteady red light through windows that hadn't been properly cleaned since the Clinton administration. Sarah Martinez preferred it that way. She'd been coming here twice a week for the past 6 months, always choosing the same stool at the far end of the bar, always ordering the same thing, Jameson, neat, no conversation. The bartender, a grizzled former Marine named Pete who'd seen 3 deployments in Iraq, had learned not to make small talk. He'd pour her drink, she'd leave exact change plus a 20% tip, and they'd nod at each other like civilized strangers. Tonight felt different, though. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that had been crawling up her spine since she'd left her downtown office. 3 years of civilian life had dulled some of her survival instincts, but not all of them. Something was off, and she couldn't pinpoint exactly what. She'd spent the day reviewing quarterly reports for the cybersecurity firm where she worked as a senior analyst. It was honest work, good work even, helping companies protect their digital infrastructure from increasingly sophisticated threats. Her colleagues knew her as the quiet woman who got results, who could spot vulnerabilities others missed, and who never joined them for happy hour drinks. They didn't know that her particular talent for identifying weaknesses came from years of exploiting them in places where mistakes meant body bags and international incidents. The transition to civilian life hadn't been easy. The Department of Veterans Affairs counselor had warned her about the challenges of reintegration, but nothing really prepared you for the absolute mundane normalcy of it all. Traffic jams instead of IED threats. Spreadsheets instead of target packages. Passive-aggressive emails instead of bullets and bombs. Most days, Sarah was grateful for the boring predictability of her new existence. But, some nights, like tonight, the quiet felt oppressive. The safety felt suffocating. The normal felt like a costume she couldn't quite make fit properly. She was nursing her second Jameson when the Navy SEALs walked in. Sarah recognized them immediately, even though they were in civilian clothes. It wasn't hard, special operations personnel carried themselves differently. There was a particular brand of confidence that came from knowing you were among the most elite warriors on the planet, a certain way of scanning rooms and calculating angles that no amount of casual Friday attire could disguise. There were 4 of them, probably late 20s to early 30s, all with the kind of haircuts that screamed military even when they were technically off duty. They commandeered a table near the pool tables, ordered a round of beers, and began the ritualistic process of decompressing from whatever training exercise or deployment preparation had consumed their day. Sarah turned back to her drink and tried to ignore them. She'd spent enough time around special operations communities to know that alcohol plus testosterone plus professional killers could lead to complications she didn't need in her carefully ordered civilian existence. Better to finish her drink and head home to her apartment, where she could continue pretending to be just another government contractor who happened to live alone with enough security cameras to make a casino jealous. But one of the SEALs had noticed her. Marcus Rodriguez prided himself on his observational skills. It came with the territory. In his line of work, the difference between noticing details and missing them was often the difference between coming home and coming home in a fly-draped box. So when he spotted the woman sitting alone at the bar, something about her immediately caught his attention. She was attractive, certainly, but that wasn't what made him look twice. It was the way she held herself. The way her eyes moved. The fact that she'd unconsciously positioned herself with a clear line of sight to both entrances and an unobstructed path to the emergency exit in the back. Marcus had spent 8 years in the Navy, the last 5 as a SEAL. He'd served in Afghanistan, Syria, and several other places that didn't officially exist on his service record. He knew how operators moved, how they thought, how they positioned themselves in unfamiliar environments. And the woman at the bar was definitely checking all those boxes. "Check out the brunette at the end of the bar," he said quietly to his teammates. "Tell me what you see." Danny Walsh, the team's explosives expert, followed Marcus's gaze and shrugged. "Good-looking woman having a drink alone. So? Look again. Look how she's sitting." This time Danny studied her more carefully. After a moment, his expression changed. "Shit. You're right. She's got the whole room mapped out." "Could be law enforcement," suggested Tommy Chen, their communications specialist. "FBI, maybe? Or one of those alphabet soup agencies?" "Could be," Marcus agreed. "Or she could be military. But, look at her hands." They all looked. Sarah's hands were wrapped around her glass, but, even from across the room, they could see the subtle scarring across her knuckles, the way her fingers moved with unconscious precision. "Those are shooter's hands," whispered Jake Sullivan, their sniper. "And not weekend warrior stuff. That's serious training." Marcus felt his curiosity shift into something stronger. He'd always been drawn to puzzles, and this woman was definitely presenting one. In his experience, there were very few women with that particular combination of situational awareness, physical conditioning, and what his grandmother would have called hard eyes. Most of them worked in places that required security clearances and came with dental plans that covered bullet removal. "I'm going to go introduce myself," Marcus announced, standing up from the table. "Bad idea," Danny said immediately. "You know the rule, don't stick your dick in classified." "Who says I'm trying to stick my dick anywhere? Maybe I'm just being friendly." His teammates exchanged looks that clearly indicated their opinion of his claimed innocent intentions. Marcus ignored them and walked toward the bar, his mind already working through approaches. Direct was usually best with military types. They appreciated honesty and despised games. Sarah saw him coming in the mirror behind the bar. She'd been tracking the SEAL's conversation through peripheral vision and body language, and when the Hispanic one with sergeant's stripes had stood up with obvious purpose, she'd known exactly where he was headed. This was the kind of situation she'd been hoping to avoid by choosing a low-key bar in a blue-collar neighborhood. But, apparently, even here, her carefully constructed invisibility had failed. She considered her options quickly. She could leave, but that would create more questions than it answered. She could be rude enough to discourage conversation, but that might escalate things in unpredictable ways. Or she could play the role she'd been practicing for 3 years, just another veteran trying to blend in. "Mind if I sit?" Marcus asked, gesturing to the empty stool beside her. "Free country," Sarah replied without turning around. Her voice carried just enough of a southwestern accent to place her somewhere in the Texas-New Mexico region, with undertones that suggested she'd spent time in places where English wasn't the primary language. Marcus settled onto the stool and signaled Pete for a beer. "Marcus Rodriguez," he said, extending his hand. Sarah looked at the offered hand for a moment before taking it. Her grip was firm without being aggressive, and her calluses told stories that Marcus filed away for later analysis. "Sarah." "Just Sarah?" "Just Sarah." Marcus smiled. He'd expected as much. "You military?" "Was." "What branch?" Sarah's pause was barely perceptible, but Marcus caught it. "Army." "What unit?" Another pause, longer this time. "Various places." Nothing exciting. This was clearly bullshit, and they both knew it. Marcus decided to push a little harder. "Really? Because from where I'm sitting, you look like someone who's seen some excitement." Sarah finally turned to face him fully, and Marcus got his first clear look at her eyes. They were dark brown, almost black, and completely unreadable. But there was something behind them that made his operator instincts stand up and take notice. "You're awfully curious for someone who just wanted to buy a lady a drink," Sarah said. "Did I say I wanted to buy you a drink?" "You didn't have to. It's written all over your face, along with about 6 other things you're trying not to ask." Marcus laughed despite himself. "Okay, you got me. I am curious. And I would like to buy you a drink. But mostly I'm curious." Curiosity killed the cat. But satisfaction brought him back. Sarah studied him for a long moment. Marcus had the distinct feeling he was being evaluated according to criteria he didn't understand. Finally, she seemed to reach some internal decision. "What do you want to know?" she asked. "Start with why you're sitting in a dive bar alone on a Tuesday night, watching exits like you're expecting trouble." "Habit." "What kind of habit?" "The kind that keeps you alive in places where people want to kill you." The honesty in her answer caught Marcus off guard. Most people, military or civilian, would have deflected or made a joke. But Sarah had just admitted, in the most matter-of-fact way possible, that she'd operated in genuinely hostile territory. "How long were you deployed?" he asked. "Long enough." "Where?" "Everywhere that matters." Marcus was starting to understand that direct questions weren't going to get him anywhere. Sarah was clearly trained in counterinterrogation techniques, probably better than most. "Time for a different approach." "I've been to Afghanistan 3 times, he said conversationally. "Syria twice. Few other places that don't officially exist. 8 years in the Navy, 5 as a SEAL. Currently assigned to DevGru Development Program at Dam Neck. My teammates over there think you're either federal law enforcement or special operations, and they're taking bets on which one." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "What do you think?" "I think you're something else entirely." "Such as?" Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I think you're one of those people who officially doesn't exist. I think your service record, if anyone could find it, would be mostly black ink and classified stamps. I think you've killed people in ways that would give my SEAL teammates nightmares." Sarah's hand had gone completely still around her glass. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You think you know me?" "I think I recognize you. Not you specifically, but what you represent. I've heard stories." "What kind of stories?" Marcus hesitated. He was venturing into territory that could get him in serious trouble if he was wrong. But something about this woman compelled him to take the risk. Stories about operators who don't officially exist. People who handle situations that are too sensitive for conventional special operations. Ghost stories, mostly. Urban legends passed around by guys who've been in the game long enough to hear things they probably shouldn't. Sarah finished her drink in one smooth motion and placed the glass carefully on the bar. When she looked at Marcus again, her expression had changed completely. The careful neutrality was gone, replaced by something much more dangerous. "You want to hear a ghost story?" she asked. Marcus nodded, suddenly, feeling like he'd just stepped onto much thinner ice than he'd realized. Sarah reached into her jacket, slowly, carefully, with the kind of deliberate motion designed to avoid triggering defensive reactions. She pulled out a worn leather wallet and extracted what looked like a standard military ID card. But, when she slid it across the bar to Marcus, he saw immediately that it wasn't standard at all. The Department of Defense seal was there, along with Sarah's photo and basic information. But, where unit designation should have been, there was just a series of numbers and letters that meant nothing to him. And, in the bottom right corner, where security clearance level was typically indicated, was a single word that made Marcus's blood run cold. Cosmic. Marcus had never seen a cosmic clearance designation in person, but he knew what it meant. It was several levels above top secret, reserved for operations so sensitive that their very existence was classified. People with cosmic clearances didn't just handle state secrets, they handled the secrets that protected state secrets. He slid the ID back across the bar with hands that were suddenly less steady than they'd been a moment before. "What did you do?" he asked. Sarah pocketed the ID and signaled Pete for another drink. When she answered, her voice carried the weight of things that couldn't be unsaid and couldn't be forgotten. "I fixed problems." "What kind of problems?" "The kind that conventional forces couldn't handle. The kind that required creative solutions." Marcus felt like he was standing at the edge of an abyss, staring down into depths he couldn't fathom. Every instinct he'd developed as a SEAL was telling him to step carefully, that he was dealing with something far beyond his experience level. "Are you going to tell me your call sign?" he asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for something. Finally, she seemed to find whatever she was looking for. "Viper 1. The whiskey glass slipped from Marcus's suddenly nerveless fingers and shattered against the floor, amber liquid spreading across worn wood like spilled secrets. Every conversation in the bar stopped. Every eye turned toward them. But Marcus barely noticed. His mind was reeling, trying to process what he'd just heard. Viper 1 wasn't just a call sign. It was a legend. A ghost story that special operations personnel told in whispers, usually prefaced with phrases like "I heard from a guy who knew a guy" or "this never officially happened, but." Viper 1 was the operator who had supposedly infiltrated a terrorist cell in Syria and eliminated the entire command structure in a single night. Viper 1 was the ghost who had walked into a Taliban stronghold in Afghanistan and walked out with intelligence that prevented a major attack on American forces. Viper 1 was the shadow who had resolved a hostage situation in Somalia that conventional rescue attempts had failed to solve. Viper 1 was a myth. A compilation of various successful operations attributed to a single operator who probably didn't exist. Except she was sitting right next to him, calmly sipping whiskey and watching his reaction with something that might have been amusement. "You're fucking with me," Marcus said finally. "Am I?" Viper 1 is a ghost story. A legend. You can't be. Can't be what? Real. Sarah smiled then, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her all evening. It transformed her face completely, making her look younger and somehow more dangerous at the same time. "Ghosts have to come from somewhere," she said. The silence that followed Sarah's revelation stretched like a taut wire between them. Marcus found himself studying her face, searching for some tell that would indicate she was running an elaborate con. But everything about her body language, her scars, her eyes, screamed authenticity. This wasn't some wannabe spinning war stories for free drinks. This was the real deal. Pete appeared with a bar towel and began cleaning up the shattered glass without comment. He'd seen enough military personnel over the years to recognize the signs of a conversation that had just entered classified territory. Smart bartenders knew when to make themselves scarce. "The Mumbai operation," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the bar. February 2019. 3 American contractors held by a group calling themselves the Crimson Dawn. Conventional rescue was deemed too risky because of civilian casualties. Then, suddenly, all the hostages were recovered and the entire terrorist cell was found dead in their safe house. Sarah's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her glass. "That was you," Marcus continued. "It wasn't a question." "You're well informed for a regular SEAL," Sarah replied. "I'm not a regular SEAL. I'm part of a joint task force that tracks certain types of operations. We study techniques, methods, outcomes. Mumbai was one of our case studies because nobody could figure out how it was accomplished." "And what conclusion did your task force reach?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That it was impossible. The building was under constant surveillance. There were 17 tangos with overlapping fields of fire and multiple escape routes. No way a conventional assault team could have gotten in and out without significant casualties. But someone did. Yeah. Someone did. Someone who moved like smoke and killed like lightning. Someone who turned a hostage rescue into what looked like an internal power struggle gone wrong." Sarah took a slow sip of her whiskey, considering her words carefully. "Hypothetically speaking, if someone were to accomplish something like that, how would they do it?" "Hypothetically? They'd need to get inside first. Probably weeks of surveillance and planning. Learn the patterns, identify the weak points, map out the internal structure. Then, they'd need to get close to the targets without being detected. And then?" Marcus found himself leaning forward despite every instinct telling him this conversation was venturing into dangerous territory. "Then, they'd have to eliminate the threats in sequence, probably starting with communications and lookouts, working inward. Quick, quiet, professional. Make it look like something other than an outside intervention. What kind of training would someone need for that?" "Everything. Languages, cultural immersion, advanced combat techniques, intelligence gathering, improvised weapons, psychological manipulation. Years of training. Maybe decades." Sarah nodded slowly. "That's a reasonable assessment. Where did you train?" "Places that don't exist on any map." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He'd heard rumors of black sites training facilities, off-books programs that operated beyond congressional oversight. But hearing it confirmed by someone who'd actually been through such training was something else entirely. "How long?" 6 years initial training. Then, ongoing education as needed." Jesus Christ. What did they turn you into?" Sarah's laugh was soft but carried an edge that made Marcus's skin crawl. "They turned me into a solution to problems that couldn't be solved by conventional means. And now? Now I analyze cybersecurity threats for a firm downtown and try to forget that I used to be very good at killing people." The casual way she said it hit Marcus harder than if she'd been dramatic about it. There was no boasting, no false modesty, just a statement of fact delivered with the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather. "Does it work? Forgetting? Some days better than others." Marcus looked around the bar, suddenly hyper-aware of how exposed they were. This wasn't the kind of conversation that should be happening in public, even in a place that catered to military personnel. "My teammates are watching us," he said. "I know. They're going to have questions. What are you going to tell them?" Marcus considered this. "That I was wrong. That you're just another veteran trying to drink away the memories." Good answer. But, even as he said it, Marcus knew he couldn't just walk away. This woman represented something he'd only heard about in whispered conversations and classified briefings. She was a living link to operations that officially never happened, to capabilities that most people couldn't imagine. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask. Why are you telling me this? Why reveal yourself to a stranger in a bar?" Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring into her glass as if it might contain answers to questions she'd been avoiding. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weariness that Marcus recognized from his own darkest moments. "Because I'm tired," she said simply. "Tired of pretending to be someone I'm not. Tired of sitting in an office pretending that spreadsheets and quarterly reports matter when I know what's really happening in the world. Tired of being alone with things that can't be shared." "So you decided to share them with me? You recognized me. Not me personally, but what I represent. That doesn't happen often." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of kindred spirits finding each other in the darkness. "How long have you been out?" 3 years, 2 months, 16 days. The precision of her answer told him everything he needed to know about how difficult the transition had been. "Do you miss it?" Sarah's smile was bitter. "I miss having a purpose. I miss knowing that what I did mattered, even if nobody would ever know about it. I miss being around people who understood the weight of the decisions we had to make. But, not the killing. No. Not the killing." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two warriors who understood the particular loneliness that came with carrying secrets that couldn't be shared with civilians. Marcus found himself wanting to know more about her, about the operations she conducted, about the training that had shaped her into something beyond normal special operations. "The stories about Viper 1, he said finally. "How many of them are true?" "Which stories?" "The Syrian operation. The one where supposedly a single operator eliminated an entire terrorist cell and made it look like they'd turned on each other." "What do you think?" "I think it sounds impossible. I also think you're sitting here confirming that impossible things happen more often than people realize." Sarah reached into her jacket again and pulled out a photograph. It was clearly taken with surveillance equipment, showing the interior of what looked like a compound or safe house. In the center of the frame, bodies were scattered in ways that suggested rapid, professional violence. "Damascus, March 2018, she said quietly. 18 tangos eliminated in 47 minutes. Intelligence recovered prevented 3 major attacks on coalition forces." Marcus studied the photograph, his trained eye picking out details that told the story of what had happened. The positioning of the bodies, the minimal blood spatter, the lack of defensive wounds on most of the corpses. This was the work of someone who understood human anatomy, who knew exactly how to kill quickly and efficiently. "How?" he asked. "Trade secrets. Come on." Sarah looked around the bar, ensuring they weren't being overheard. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. 18 months of preparation. I spoke fluent Arabic, understood the local dialects, knew the cultural nuances. I became someone they trusted, someone they confided in. By the time I moved, they weren't just targets anymore. They were people I'd shared meals with, laughed with, prayed with. The weight of what she was describing settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. Infiltration at that level required more than just language skills and cultural knowledge. It required the ability to completely submerge your identity, to become someone else so thoroughly that even you might forget who you really were. "That's not just training," he said. "That's psychological conditioning on a level I can't even imagine. They broke me down completely and built me back up as something else. Something that could do what needed to be done without hesitation, without remorse, without leaving traces." "How many operations?" 47 confirmed. Maybe a dozen others that were too classified for even my handlers to know about. Marcus did the math quickly. If she'd been operational for roughly 8 years, that meant 6 operations per year on average. Each one requiring months of preparation and, potentially weeks or months of infiltration. The mental toll alone would be staggering. How did you survive it? Psychologically, I mean. Compartmentalization. Meditation. And the absolute belief that what I was doing was necessary to protect innocent lives. Do you still believe that? Sarah's pause was longer this time, and, when she answered, Marcus heard doubt creeping into her voice for the first time. Most days. But, some nights, I lie awake wondering if there might have been other ways. Non-violent solutions that we didn't consider because they weren't as efficient. This was the heart of it, Marcus realized. This was why she was sitting in a dive bar drinking alone instead of surrounded by fellow veterans sharing war stories. Because her war stories couldn't be shared, and the moral weight of her actions couldn't be distributed among a unit or squadron. You carried all of this alone? Operational security required complete isolation between missions. I couldn't maintain relationships, couldn't trust anyone with the truth about what I did. The only people who knew were my handlers, and they rotated every 18 months to prevent emotional attachment. Marcus felt a surge of anger at the system that had created such isolation. Military units worked as teams specifically because shared burden was essential for psychological survival. But Sarah had been deliberately cut off from that support structure. That's inhumane. That's effective. But at what cost? Sarah finished her drink and signaled for another. At the cost of everything else. Relationships, family, any semblance of a normal life. By the time they deactivated my program, I had no idea how to be a regular person anymore. Is that why you chose civilian work instead of staying military? I couldn't stay military. Too many people in the intelligence community knew my face, even if they didn't know my real identity. And I couldn't risk exposure by working with regular units. Marcus was beginning to understand the impossible situation she'd been placed in. Too valuable to waste, too dangerous to integrate normally, too isolated to function effectively in conventional roles. So you disappeared. As completely as I could. New identity, new background, new life. The woman who was Viper 1 officially died in a training accident. But you're still her. Parts of me. The parts that won't go away no matter how hard I try to bury them. Marcus looked across the bar at his teammates, who were making increasingly obvious attempts to eavesdrop on his conversation. Soon they'd either come over directly or start sending texts asking for updates. He needed to make a decision about how to handle this situation. My team is going to want to know what we talked about, he said. Tell them I'm a veteran who's seen too much and drinks too much. Tell them I'm not interested in company. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. And what about us? Sarah looked at him directly, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that might have been hope mixed with fear. What about us? I'd like to see you again. Away from here, somewhere we can talk without an audience. That's not a good idea. Why not? Because I'm not good for people. Because getting close to me has historically been dangerous for everyone involved. Because I don't know how to be normal and I'm not sure I can learn. Marcus reached across the bar and touched her hand gently. Her skin was warm, human, real. Not the cold marble of a legend or the untouchable perfection of a myth. Maybe normal is overrated, he said. 3 days passed before Marcus saw Sarah again. He'd returned to the Anchor's Rest the following 2 nights, nursing beers and hoping she'd show up, but the stool at the end of the bar remained empty. By the 3rd night, he'd convinced himself that their encounter had been some kind of elaborate test or psychological operation, and that he'd never see the woman who claimed to be Viper 1 again. Which made it all the more surprising when she appeared at his table during lunch at a sandwich shop near the base. Mind if I sit? Sarah asked, echoing his approach from 3 nights before. Marcus looked up from his turkey club to find her standing beside his table, dressed in a conservative business suit that somehow made her look more dangerous rather than less. She'd done something different with her hair, and she was wearing makeup that softened her features, but her eyes were still the same dark pools that seemed to see everything. Please, Marcus said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. Sarah sat down with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent years training in body movement and positioning. Even in a civilian setting, she automatically chose the seat that gave her the best view of entrances and exits. I've been thinking about our conversation, she said without preamble. And I realized I haven't had a real conversation with another person in 3 years.
Not one where I could be honest about who I am and what I've done.
Marcus set down his sandwich, sensing that this was going to be a more significant conversation than the casual lunch meeting it appeared to be.
How did you find me? He asked.
You're not exactly hard to track. Your team has a standing reservation at the base commissary most weekdays at noon. You always order the same thing from this place and sit at the same table. The fact that she'd been observing him without his knowledge should have been alarming.
Instead, Marcus found it oddly comforting.
It meant she'd been thinking about him too, that their encounter had affected her enough to make her do reconnaissance.
Are you stalking me, Sarah? I prefer the term gathering intelligence on a person of interest. And, am I? A person of interest? Sarah's expression became serious. You are. Which is both intriguing and problematic. Why problematic? Because I don't get intrigued by people anymore. It's dangerous for everyone involved.
Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her face.
What happened to make you so afraid of human connection? The last person who got close to me ended up dead.
The blunt statement hung between them like a live grenade. Marcus waited for her to elaborate, but Sarah seemed content to let the implications speak for themselves.
Enemy action, he asked finally. Collateral damage. Miguel was an intelligence asset I worked with in Colombia.
Good man, family man, someone who believed he was making the world safer by helping us track cartel operations.
Sarah's voice took on a distant quality, as if she was seeing events that had played out years ago in a different hemisphere.
I was embedded with a trafficking organization for 8 months.
Miguel was my primary contact with the agency, my lifeline to extraction if things went sideways. We met weekly at a small cafe in Medellin, always maintaining operational security, always professional.
Marcus could see where this was going, but he let her tell it in her own time.
Except somewhere along the way, professional became personal.
Miguel started asking about my cover identity, about my family, about what I planned to do after the operation was complete. I should have shut it down immediately, should have requested a new contact. Instead, I let myself enjoy having someone who cared whether I made it home alive.
What happened?
The cartel figured out there was an informant in their organization. They couldn't identify who, so they started eliminating anyone who might have access to the information that had been leaked.
Miguel was on that list. Sarah's hands had gone completely still, Marcus noticed.
It was the kind of absolute stillness that came from rigid emotional control. They took him from his home while his wife and children watched. They tortured him for 3 days, trying to get him to reveal his contacts.
He never broke, never gave them anything that could have led back to me. He died protecting my cover. That wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? I knew the risks. I knew that personal connections were a liability in that kind of operation.
I let my loneliness override my training, and a good man died because of it. Marcus reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She didn't pull away, but he could feel the tension in her muscles.
How long ago? He asked.
4 years.
It was my last operation before they deactivated the program. Is that why they shut it down? Because of what happened to Miguel? Sarah's laugh was bitter. No.
They shut it down because I lost my edge. Because after Miguel died, I started questioning orders, started looking for alternatives to elimination, started caring more about protecting innocence than completing objectives efficiently. This revelation hit Marcus harder than anything else she'd shared. The idea that her capacity for human connection, for empathy, had been seen as a liability by her handlers was both heartbreaking and infuriating.
They saw your humanity as a weakness.
From their perspective, it was.
Viper 1 was designed to be a perfect weapon. Weapons don't have feelings, don't form attachments, don't hesitate when targets need to be eliminated. But you did. In my final operation, I had a clear shot at a high-value target. Intelligence indicated he was planning a major attack on American interests. Standard procedure would have been to eliminate him immediately.
Sarah paused, her eyes focused on something beyond the sandwich shop's window.
But
I'd been tracking him for 6 weeks, and I'd learned things that weren't in the briefing materials. He had a daughter, maybe 8 years old, who was undergoing cancer treatment. He visited her every Tuesday at the hospital, always brought her the same stuffed animal, always stayed exactly 2 hours. Marcus could see the internal conflict playing out across her face, the tension between training and conscience that had ultimately ended her operational career.
You couldn't pull the trigger.
I could have.
But I chose not to.
Instead, I spent another month gathering intelligence, building a case for a capture operation instead of elimination. I wanted to bring him in alive, extract information about the planned attack, maybe even turn him into an asset.
Did it work?
Partially. We prevented the attack and gathered valuable intelligence about his network. But my handlers were furious that I deviated from operational parameters. They said I'd compromised mission effectiveness by allowing personal sentiment to override tactical considerations. Marcus was beginning to understand why Sarah had chosen to leave military life entirely. The kind of moral flexibility required for her type of work would eventually come into conflict with basic human decency for anyone with a functional conscience. So they retired Viper 1.
Officially, she died in a training accident.
Unofficially, they gave me a new identity and a pension sufficient to ensure my silence about operations that never officially happened.
And you've been trying to be someone else ever since. Someone normal.
Someone who solves problems with policies and procedures instead of violence. Someone who goes to sleep at night without calculating how many different ways to kill everyone in the room. Marcus looked around the sandwich shop, suddenly aware of how automatically he'd been doing exactly that kind of tactical assessment. It was an occupational hazard for anyone in special operations, but he couldn't imagine living with the level of hypervigilance that Sarah's training had instilled.
Is it working? Being normal?
Some days.
Other days I feel like I'm wearing an ill-fitting costume, pretending to be someone I can never actually become.
Marcus understood that feeling more than he cared to admit. The transition from military to civilian life was difficult enough for regular service members.
For someone with Sarah's background, it must feel like trying to learn an entirely different species' social customs.
Maybe you don't need to become someone completely different, he suggested.
Maybe you just need to find a way to be yourself in a different context. My real self is someone who's killed 47 people.
Who can speak 6 languages fluently and 3 others well enough to pass as a native speaker. Who knows 17 different ways to eliminate a target using common household items. That's not exactly compatible with normal civilian relationships.
It might be more compatible than you think. Especially with someone who understands that kind of background.
Sarah studied his face intently, as if she was trying to determine whether he was serious or just naive. You don't know what you're suggesting, she said finally.
Don't I? I've killed people too, Sarah.
Maybe not as many, maybe not in the same circumstances, but I understand the weight of it. I understand what it's like to carry memories that can't be shared with civilians.
It's not the same.
Why not? Because you killed in combat, in situations where it was clearly justified, where you were protecting your teammates and completing legitimate military objectives. I killed people who trusted me, people who thought I was their friend or their lover or their business partner. I killed them in their sleep, in their homes, surrounded by their families. The raw pain in her voice made Marcus's chest tighten. He was beginning to understand the unique psychological burden she carried, the way her methods of operation had forced her to betray every human instinct for trust and connection.
That wasn't murder, he said quietly. That was war conducted by other means. Was it? Because some nights I can't tell the difference.
Marcus reached across the table and took both of her hands in his. This time she didn't resist, and he could feel some of the tension leaving her muscles.
The difference is that you feel guilty about it. The difference is that you question whether there might have been other ways.
The difference is that you're sitting here, 3 years later, still carrying the weight of every life you took.
Guilt doesn't bring back the dead. No.
But it proves that you're still human. It proves that whatever they tried to turn you into, they didn't succeed in destroying the part of you that cares about other people. Sarah's eyes had grown bright with unshed tears, and Marcus could see that his words were hitting something deep inside her that she'd been trying to keep buried. "I don't know how to be close to someone without it being dangerous for them," she whispered.
"We'll figure it out together. You don't understand. There are people who might still consider me a threat. People who might try to eliminate me to protect secrets I carry.
Anyone close to me becomes a potential target."
Marcus smiled grimly. "Sarah, I'm a Navy SEAL. I've been a potential target my entire adult life. I think I can handle the risk. This is different." "How?" "Because I care about you. And caring about people is what gets them killed." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they should cross.
Marcus could see the fear in her eyes, the terror of opening herself up to the possibility of connection after years of forced isolation.
"I care about you too," he said simply. "You don't know me well enough to care about me. I know enough.
I know you're someone who's sacrificed everything to protect innocent people. I know you're someone who still questions whether the ends justified the means. I know you're someone who's been carrying an impossible burden alone for years. And I know you're someone who recognized what I was without judgment, who didn't run away when you learned the truth about me. I know you're someone brave enough to sit here and tell me that my past doesn't disqualify me from having a future." They sat in silence for a moment, both of them processing the implications of what they'd just admitted to each other.
"So what happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we take it one day at a time.
We figure out what normal looks like for two people who've never really been normal. We learn to trust each other."
"I'm not sure I remember how to trust anyone."
"Then, we'll learn together." Sarah squeezed his hands gently, and Marcus could see something shifting in her expression. Not hope exactly, but maybe the possibility of hope. "There's something else you should know," she said.
"What?" "The reason I sought you out today. The real reason."
Marcus felt his stomach clench.
"What is it?" "Someone's been asking questions about Viper 1. Someone with official credentials and access to classified files. Someone who shouldn't know that name exists."
The weight of what she was saying hit Marcus immediately. If someone was investigating Sarah's past, it meant her carefully constructed civilian life might be about to come crashing down.
"How do you know?" "I still have contacts. People who owe me favors, people who remember what I did for them.
One of them reached out yesterday to warn me that inquiries were being made."
"What kind of inquiries?"
"The kind that suggests someone thinks Viper 1 might still be alive." The secure phone buzzed at 3:17 in the morning, jolting Marcus from the uneasy sleep that had become his norm since Sarah's revelation about the inquiries into Viper 1. He grabbed the encrypted device from his nightstand, noting the unfamiliar number displayed on the screen.
"Rodriguez. It's Sarah."
Her voice was tight with controlled tension. "I need you to listen carefully and don't ask questions until I'm finished." Marcus sat up immediately, his training kicking in as he recognized the tone of someone operating under extreme stress.
"Go ahead."
"Someone tried to breach my apartment tonight. Professional job, very clean, almost got through my security measures. I managed to evade, but my position is compromised. I'm mobile and need a safe location for 12 hours while I figure out my next move." Marcus was already reaching for his clothes before she finished speaking.
"Where are you now?"
3 blocks from the base, moving northeast on foot. I can't use my vehicle because they've likely tagged it.
"I'll pick you up in 5 minutes.
Look for a blue Ford F-150, Virginia tags." Marcus paused, considering the implications. "Sarah, if someone's actively hunting you, they might have surveillance on anyone you've had contact with."
"I know.
I'm sorry for dragging you into this, but I didn't have anywhere else to go." The vulnerability in her voice was something Marcus had never heard before, and it hit him harder than any admission of professional capabilities or past operations. This was Sarah stripped of all her carefully constructed defenses, reduced to the fundamental human need for safety and connection.
"Don't apologize. I'm coming to get you."
Marcus threw on clothes and grabbed his service weapon from the safe, along with extra magazines and the bug-out bag he kept ready from his SEAL training. If Sarah was being hunted by professionals, they were potentially walking into a situation that required more than civilian law enforcement could handle. He found her exactly where she'd said she'd be, standing in the shadows of an all-night laundromat, dressed in dark clothing that helped her blend with the environment. She approached the truck cautiously, scanning for potential threats before sliding into the passenger seat.
"Thank you," she said simply. "Where to?" "Somewhere isolated, somewhere we can see anyone approaching from a distance.
And somewhere that won't be connected to either of our official identities." Marcus knew exactly the place. 20 minutes later, they were parked at a hunting cabin that belonged to his uncle, deep enough in the Virginia woods to be invisible from the road but positioned on high ground that provided excellent sight lines in all directions. "Tell me what happened," Marcus said once they were inside and Sarah had completed a thorough security sweep of the property.
"I came home from work around 7:30.
Everything looked normal, but something felt off. The way my neighbor's dog was behaving, subtle changes in the positioning of items near my door.
Small things that most people wouldn't notice."
Sarah moved to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains while she talked, her body language radiating the hyper-alert tension of someone expecting contact at any moment. "I went around to the back entrance and discovered that someone had defeated my electronic locks. Very sophisticated work, not the kind of thing you learn from YouTube videos."
"Military or intelligence training? How did you get out without being detected?" "I never went in. I have cameras positioned to give me interior views without having to enter the apartment.
I could see two figures moving through my living space, conducting what looked like a professional search."
Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "They weren't there to hurt you?"
"No. If this was an assassination attempt, they would have set up an ambush rather than conducting a search."
"They were looking for something specific. Any idea what?"
Sarah turned away from the window and fixed him with a look that contained equal measures of resignation and determination.
"They were looking for evidence that Viper 1 is still alive.
Files, communications, anything that could confirm my identity and current location."
"Did they find anything?"
"I don't think so. I keep all my sensitive materials in a safety deposit box under a different identity. My apartment is deliberately sterile, designed to support my civilian cover story and nothing more." Marcus processed this information, trying to understand the implications. "So they still don't know for certain that you're alive. They know someone matching my physical description and skill set is living under the Sarah Martinez identity. But they can't prove I'm Viper 1 unless they can connect me to specific operations or classified materials."
"Which means you still have options."
"Limited ones. I can run, disappear completely, start over somewhere else with a new identity. I can stay and try to convince whoever's hunting me that they have the wrong person. Or..." She trailed off, but Marcus could see in her expression that there was a third option she was considering but didn't want to voice.
"Or what?"
"Or I can find out who's behind this and eliminate the threat permanently." The casual way she said it reminded Marcus forcefully that despite her attempts to live a civilian life, Sarah was still fundamentally a weapon designed for solving problems through violence.
"That's not your only option. Isn't it?"
"Marcus, these aren't criminals or terrorists who might be deterred by law enforcement. These are professionals operating with official sanction, which means they have resources, legal immunity, and the authority to pursue me indefinitely."
"You don't know that they're operating with official sanction. Who else would have access to classified files about operations that officially never happened? Who else would know to look for Viper 1 in the first place?" Marcus had to admit she had a point. The level of sophistication she described, combined with knowledge of her operational history, suggested government involvement at a very high level. "Okay, let's assume you're right. Let's assume this is some kind of official operation. Why now? Why after 3 years of leaving you alone would they suddenly decide you're a threat that needs to be eliminated?"
Sarah moved away from the window and began pacing the small cabin like a caged predator. Marcus could see her mind working, processing possibilities and calculating probabilities.
"Something's changed.
Either there's been a leak about classified operations that they think might be traced back to me, or there's a new threat that requires my specific skill set.
What kind of new threat? The kind that conventional special operations can't handle.
The kind that requires someone with my particular background and capabilities. The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow.
They're not hunting you to eliminate you. They're hunting you to reactivate you. Sarah's smile was grim. That's my assessment as well.
But, you're officially dead.
How could they reactivate someone who doesn't exist?
The same way they created Viper 1 in the first place.
New identity, new background, new cover story.
Except this time they'd have the advantage of working with someone who already has the training and experience. Marcus sat down heavily in one of the cabin's worn chairs, trying to process the magnitude of what Sarah was suggesting.
Would you go back? 3 years ago, absolutely not.
I was done with that life, done with the killing, done with carrying secrets that couldn't be shared with anyone.
And, now?
Sarah stopped pacing and looked directly at him.
Now I've remembered what it feels like to care about someone. Now I have something worth protecting.
The statement hung between them like a confession and a declaration of war simultaneously. Marcus understood that she was telling him she would kill to protect him, but also that she was willing to risk everything to avoid returning to her former life.
There has to be another way.
Such as?
We go to the authorities. We tell them what's happening and ask for protection.
Which authorities?
The local police? They have no jurisdiction over classified operations. The FBI?
They're part of the same system that created Viper 1 in the first place.
Military command?
They're the ones who would have authorized the reactivation in the first place.
Marcus realized she was right.
Sarah existed in a gray area between official and unofficial, between legal and illegal, that made conventional protection almost impossible to secure.
Then, we need to know more about who's behind this and what they want.
Agreed.
But that means staying mobile, staying alert, and being prepared for the possibility that they'll escalate their approach. Meaning? Meaning that if they can't find me through surveillance and investigation, they might try to draw me out by threatening people I care about.
The words hit Marcus like ice water.
They'd come after me?
You, your teammates, your family. Anyone who might be used as leverage to force me out of hiding. Marcus felt anger building in his chest, the cold professional rage that had served him well in combat situations. The idea that innocent people might be threatened because of his connection to Sarah was both infuriating and unacceptable.
How do we protect them? We don't.
We disappear completely, cut all ties, and hope that without obvious connections, they'll eventually stop looking.
That's not happening. Marcus, you don't understand what you're signing up for. These people have resources that you can't imagine.
They can make anyone disappear, manufacture evidence of crimes that never happened, destroy lives and careers with a few keystrokes.
And you can do what? Kill them all?
Sarah's expression became absolutely still, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that reminded him why Viper 1 had become a legend among special operations personnel.
If necessary. The conversation was interrupted by the soft chime of Sarah's encrypted phone. She glanced at the display and immediately tensed. What is it? Message from my contact. Someone just ran a facial recognition scan on surveillance footage from the area around my apartment building. They have visual confirmation of my current appearance. Marcus felt the walls closing in. How long do we have?
Maybe 6 hours before they can coordinate a response and position assets in this area. Less if they're willing to commit significant resources.
Then, we need to move. No. Sarah's voice carried absolute finality. You need to move.
You need to get back to base, establish an alibi for tonight, and distance yourself from me completely.
I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice.
If they connect you to me officially, your military career is over.
More importantly, they might decide you're a liability that needs to be eliminated along with me. Marcus stood up and moved to where Sarah was standing by the window. He could see the fear in her eyes, the desperate desire to protect him even at the cost of her own safety. "I told you we'd figure this out together," he said quietly. That was before we knew how serious the threat was. The threat doesn't change anything. If anything, it makes it more important that you don't face this alone.
Sarah reached up and touched his face gently, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with the tenderness of someone who expected never to see him again.
"I won't be responsible for getting you killed." "Then, don't get me killed. Use every skill you have, every piece of training, every instinct to keep both of us alive." Marcus could see the internal battle playing out across her features, the conflict between her desire to protect him and her recognition that she might need his help to survive what was coming. "If we do this," she said finally, "we do it my way. No questioning orders, no hesitation when I tell you to do something, no matter how extreme it might seem." "Agreed. And you need to understand that the woman you think you care about might not be the woman you see when this is over. I might have to become Viper 1 again, completely and without reservation." Marcus pulled her closer, feeling the tension in her body, the coiled potential for violence that she kept so carefully controlled. "Then, I guess I'll find out if I can care about Viper 1 too." The abandoned warehouse in Norfolk's industrial district had been empty for 3 years, another casualty of economic shifts that left entire city blocks looking like concrete graveyards. But its position near the shipyard, with multiple access routes and sight lines extending in all directions, made it perfect for the kind of meeting that Sarah had arranged. Marcus crouched beside a broken window on the second floor, scanning the approaches through the scope of his rifle while Sarah completed her final preparations below. They'd been in position for 2 hours, waiting for the contact who had agreed to meet them with information about who was hunting Viper 1 and why. The past week had been a crash course in living off the grid. Sarah had activated resources that Marcus hadn't even known existed: safe houses, weapons caches, and communication networks that operated completely outside official channels. She'd moved through it all with the fluid competence of someone returning to their natural element, and Marcus had watched her transform from the conflicted civilian he'd met at the bar into something much more dangerous. "Movement, southeast approach," Marcus whispered into his throat. "Mike, I see it." Sarah's voice came back calm and steady. "Single individual, moving cautiously but not tactically." "That's our guy." Marcus tracked the figure through his scope as it approached the warehouse. Middle-aged man in an expensive suit, moving with the careful gait of someone who spent more time behind a desk than in the field. He matched the description Sarah had given him of her former handler, a CIA operations coordinator named David Chen. "He's clean," Marcus reported, having completed a full scan for potential backup or surveillance. "Copy. Moving to intercept." Marcus watched Sarah emerge from the shadows on the ground floor like smoke given form. She'd changed clothes again, trading the business casual attire she'd worn for the past 3 years for tactical gear that seemed to transform her into someone else entirely. This was Viper 1, and the difference was unmistakable. Chen stopped when he saw her, his hands raised slightly to show they were empty. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the recognition and something that might have been fear crossed the man's features. "Hello, David," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly in the still air of the warehouse. "You look good, Sarah. Civilian life has been treating you well." Until someone started asking questions about a dead woman. Questions that led to people breaking into my apartment and scanning surveillance footage for my face. Chen's expression remained carefully neutral, but Marcus could see the micro-expressions that suggested the man was under significant stress. That wasn't supposed to happen. But it did happen. Which means either you've lost control of the situation, or you're not being honest about why you wanted this meeting. Marcus adjusted his position slightly, maintaining his overwatch while trying to catch every word of the conversation below. Sarah had briefed him on Chen's background: 20 years in intelligence, most of it running deep cover operations that required the kind of moral flexibility that destroyed normal people's consciences. "There's a situation," Chen said finally. "Something that requires your specific skill set. I'm retired. Retirement is a luxury that people in our line of work don't always get to enjoy." Sarah's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, and Marcus recognized the change as her moving into a more aggressive stance.
Whatever Chen was about to propose, she was already rejecting it.
"Let me save you some time," she said. "The answer is no.
Whatever situation you think requires Viper One's attention can be handled by conventional assets, or it can remain unhandled.
I'm done. Even if it means preventing another September 11th?
The words hung in the air like a challenge and a threat simultaneously. Marcus could see Sarah's reaction even from his elevated position, the slight tightening of her shoulders, the way her weight shifted forward onto the balls of her feet.
"Explain."
Chen reached slowly into his jacket and produced a tablet computer. He activated the screen and held it where Sarah could see it. 3 weeks ago, we intercepted communications indicating that a terror cell has acquired materials for a radiological dispersal device. Not a nuclear bomb, but a dirty bomb capable of contaminating several city blocks and killing thousands through radiation exposure. Sarah moved closer to examine the tablet, but Marcus noticed she kept herself positioned so that she could reach Chen before he could draw a weapon.
Conventional counterterrorism assets should be able to handle that. Under normal circumstances, yes.
But this cell is operating out of a compound in Syria that's technically under the protection of Russian forces.
Any overt military action would risk triggering a larger international incident.
Marcus felt his stomach sink as he began to understand where this was heading. Chen was describing exactly the kind of situation that Viper One had been created to handle, threats that were too sensitive for conventional military response. So you need someone who can infiltrate the compound, eliminate the threat, and disappear without leaving evidence of American involvement.
The device is scheduled to be transported to the United States within the next 2 weeks.
We have one chance to stop it before it reaches American soil. Sarah stared at the tablet for a long moment, and Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out across her features. This was the kind of mission that had defined her career, the kind of threat that she'd sacrificed everything to prevent.
Why me? There are other assets who could handle this. Because the cell leader is someone you've worked with before.
Someone who trusts Viper One enough to let her get close. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Marcus could see her hands clench into fists as she processed the implications.
Who? Khalil Nasser. The arms dealer you turned into an asset during the Damascus operation in 2018.
Marcus remembered Sarah mentioning that operation, remembered her description of how she'd spent months earning the trust of people she eventually killed. Now Chen was asking her to exploit those same relationships again.
Khalil thinks Viper One is dead. Khalil thinks a lot of things.
But he still has a weakness for beautiful women with the right skill sets. Especially women who can help him expand his operation into new territories.
Sarah handed the tablet back to Chen with movements that were rigidly controlled. "And you think I can just walk back into his life after 4 years and convince him to trust me again? We think you're the only one who can get close enough to stop this device from reaching American cities."
Marcus watched the conversation with growing dread, understanding that Sarah was being presented with an impossible choice. Refuse the mission and potentially allow thousands of innocent Americans to die. Accept it and return to the life she'd fought so hard to escape.
"What about my current situation?" Sarah asked. "The people who were hunting me? That was us.
We needed to assess your current capabilities and determine whether civilian life had compromised your operational effectiveness." The casual admission that they'd terrorized her for the past week as a test made Marcus's finger tighten on his rifle's trigger. He could see Sarah's reaction too, the way her entire body went still with barely contained rage.
"You invaded my home. You threatened my safety.
You made me believe I was in danger from hostile forces.
We needed to see if you still had the instincts necessary for this kind of operation. Your response confirmed that you do."
Sarah took a step closer to Chen, and Marcus could see the former CIA handler fighting the urge to back away.
"And if I refuse?"
"Then, you go back to your civilian life and we find another way to handle the situation."
"But, Sarah, there might not be another way. And if this device detonates in an American city, those deaths will be on your conscience." It was expertly done, Marcus had to admit.
Chen had presented the choice not as patriotic duty or professional obligation, but as a moral imperative that exploited Sarah's deepest vulnerabilities.
How long do I have to decide? 12 hours.
After that, we have to commit to alternative solutions that are far less likely to succeed. Chen turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Sarah. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about the surveillance and the apartment search. But we had to be certain you were still the person we needed you to be. After Chen disappeared into the Norfolk night, Sarah stood motionless in the center of the warehouse for nearly 5 minutes. Marcus maintained his overwatch position, giving her time to process what had just happened. Finally, she spoke into her throat mic, "We need to talk." Marcus made his way down from the second floor, moving carefully in the darkness. When he reached Sarah, he could see that she was struggling with emotions that her training had taught her to suppress. "They played me," she said quietly. "The whole thing was manipulation designed to force me back into operational status."
Are you going to do it?
Sarah looked at him with eyes that held pain and resignation in equal measure.
If I don't, and that device kills innocent people, how do I live with that? But if I do go back, how do I live with what I'll have to become again?
Marcus moved closer and pulled her into his arms, feeling the tension in her body, the coiled potential for violence that she carried like a curse.
Maybe you don't have to become Viper 1 completely.
Maybe you can be Sarah Martinez, who happens to have Viper 1 skills when innocent lives are at stake.
You don't understand. When I'm operational, when I'm in the field, I can't afford to be conflicted about what I have to do.
I have to be willing to kill anyone, betray anyone, sacrifice anyone if the mission requires it.
Including me?
Sarah's hesitation was barely perceptible, but Marcus caught it. In that moment of uncertainty, he saw both the woman he cared about and the weapon she'd been trained to become. "I don't know," she whispered. "And that terrifies me more than anything else," Chen said tonight. They stood together in the abandoned warehouse, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, facing a choice that could destroy everything they'd begun to build together.
"What if I went with you?" Marcus asked. "Absolutely not." "Why not?"
"You said yourself that this Khalil has a weakness for beautiful women.
What if you showed up with a business partner? Someone who could watch your back while you got close to the target?"
Sarah pulled back to look at him directly. "Marcus, this isn't a SEAL operation where you have backup and extraction plans and rules of engagement. This is walking into hostile territory with nothing but cover identity and whatever weapons I can acquire locally.
If something goes wrong, there's no one coming to help us.
Then, we make sure nothing goes wrong." Marcus could see her considering the possibility, weighing the advantages of having backup against the risks of involving him in something that could easily get them both killed. "If we did this together," she said slowly, "you'd have to be willing to do things that aren't in any military manual.
You'd have to be willing to kill people who think they're our friends.
You'd have to be willing to walk away from your military career permanently, because there's no coming back from this kind of operation." Marcus thought about his life in the Navy, about the career he'd built and the future he'd planned. Then, he thought about Sarah sitting alone in a bar, carrying secrets that couldn't be shared, fighting a war that never officially ended.
"My military career doesn't mean anything if I lose you to that war."
Sarah's smile was sad and beautiful and terrible all at once. "Then, I guess we're both about to find out what happens when Viper 1 gets backup for the first time in her career." 6 months later, Marcus stood on the deck of a sailboat anchored in international waters off the coast of Greece, watching Sarah emerge from the cabin with 2 cups of coffee and a satellite phone that had been ringing intermittently for the past hour. The operation in Syria had been successful, though not in the way Chen had envisioned. They'd infiltrated Nasser's organization, located the radiological device, and prevented its transport to American soil. But, instead of eliminating the entire cell, Sarah had found a way to turn several of them into long-term intelligence assets, providing ongoing monitoring of similar threats. It had taken every skill she possessed and several that Marcus had contributed from his SEAL training. More importantly, it had proven that Sarah Martinez and Viper 1 could coexist, that she could use her lethal capabilities without losing her humanity.
"Chen again?" Marcus asked, accepting the coffee. "Third time this morning."
Apparently, there's another situation that requires our particular skill set.
Our skill set?
Sarah smiled, and Marcus saw in her expression the peace that had eluded her for so many years. She'd found a way to be who she was without apology, and, more importantly, she'd found someone who could stand beside her in the darkness without losing himself. It turns out that Viper 1 is much more effective when she has a partner she trusts completely. Marcus pulled her close, breathing in the salt air and the scent of her hair, thinking about the call sign that had never made it into any official records, Viper 2.
So what do we tell Chen?
We tell him that Viper 1 is available for consultation on a freelance basis.
With conditions. What kind of conditions?
The kind that ensure we never have to pretend to be someone we're not again. The satellite phone rang again, and this time Sarah answered it.
Chen? Sarah Martinez speaking.
Yes, I got your messages. Yes, we're interested in discussing the situation.
But, this time, we do it our way.
Marcus listened as she negotiated terms that would let them use their skills to protect innocent lives while maintaining control over their own fate. It wasn't the normal life either of them had originally imagined, but it was honest in a way that normal had never been. As the sailboat rocked gently in the Mediterranean swells, Marcus realized that some people weren't meant for normal lives. Some people were meant to stand in the space between light and darkness, protecting others from threats they couldn't imagine. And some people were lucky enough to find someone who could stand there with them. The woman beside him was no longer trying to be someone else. She was exactly who she'd always been, a protector, a warrior, a ghost when necessary.
But she was also Sarah Martinez, the woman who